Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we're going to be talking about writing your outline. We're going to really dive into the specifics of the outline. And in the next video, you can see me writing an outline. So if you need a little bit more guidance, you can head over there. But let's start with the overview. We're going to talk about the format, the length, the outline heading, organizational pattern, introductions, main point, transitions, and conclusions. So this is what the outline looks like. And you might remember from the last lecture that the outline can be found in outline notes and also in the outline assignment itself. So I would go right now and find those outlines so that you can follow along. Maybe you take notes on the specific points of an outline on how to write an outline. Very meta of us. The person of interest outline should really only be between 1 to 2 pages max, and that's really going to depend on how you speak. If you notice, in the example that I give you, I think mine is about 1.5 pages, and the speech length is 3.5 minutes. It's literally right there. So I would go no farther than 2 pages on this. So let's start at the very top up there. Like you can see, there's a general purpose, a specific purpose, a thesis, and an organizational structure. So let's start with the heading. All right. So the general purpose is really going to be one of 4 different purposes: to honor, to inform, to persuade, and to entertain. Now, some communication scholars will tell you really there's only 2: to inform or to persuade. Others will say there's really only to persuade. But I would say for this speech, it's probably either to honor or to inform. And for most of y'all, it will probably be to inform for the person of interest speech and the informative speech. Your specific purpose is a little different. It's going to be your general purpose, inform. Your audience, to keep yourself audience focused, to inform my audience about who. Who is your person of interest? To inform my audience about Attila the Hun, to inform my audience about Robert Downey Jr., to inform my audience about Charles Manson, whoever it happens to be, this is where you would put that. The next is your thesis. Now, this is the same thesis as you're going to put in your introduction and your conclusion. For your thesis for speeches, they should just be really clear. Just tell us exactly what you're talking about. You can make them as broad or as narrow as possible. So, for example, the thesis, I'm going to tell you about the Scourge of God, Attila the Hun. Or for your thesis, I'm going to tell you about Robert Downey Jr.'s movies, whatever it happens to be. The final part of the heading is your organizational pattern. Your organizational pattern, while there are more than this, I really wish I had known about this when I was writing a lot of my English essays. Think about how you want to organize your main points. The ones we're going to talk about this time are going to be topical or categorical, biographical, compare and contrast, causal, spatial, problem cause solution, and chronological. So guess what? Topical is just 3 similar categories or topics. Like, for example, I'm going to tell you about 3 of Robert Downey Jr.'s movies. I'm going to tell you about 3 different types of dogs. Whatever it happens to be, can be that simple. Chronological is separated from time. So the thing about chronological is that usually there's set periods of time. So for example, it might be let's talk about rap in the 1980s, the 2000s, and the 2020s. So you notice it's separated by 20 years there. Or it could be seconds. We're going to talk about the life of a mayfly in the first hour of its life, the 5th hour of its life, and the 10th hour of the life, whatever it happens to be. Biographical, of course, is about a person itself. So it could be early life, middle life, and later life, just that simple. The big difference I would argue between chronological and biographical is that chronological, you could go backwards. You could say, hey, we're going to start talking about 2020 rap and then go back to 1980 rap. Compare and contrast. You are just doing a pro versus con, a plan A versus plan B. Could be something like death penalty. You're for it, you're against it. Could be like health insurance. Should we go Medicare for all or should we continue with private health care? Could be like a sports team. Let's talk about the Dodgers and the Giants. Just that simple. Causal is cause and effect. So think of an effect. What is going on that maybe is a problem in the Bay Area? I always like to say high cost of housing. So why is that happening? What's the cause of that? We know the effect. Traffic. Traffic is a big problem. So why does this keep on happening? So that would be the cause. Spatial, I've had exactly one student ever do a spatial, and it is the example outline for the informative speech. And this is separated by space. So, for example, if you were going to talk about the Civil War and you talked about the northern states and then the southern states, that's how you divided them. That would be spatial. Problem, cause, solution. Now, this is best saved for the persuasive speech. So your main point one, you're going to state a problem. For example, traffic in the Bay Area. Main point two, you're going to state the cause. Well, we have inefficient public transportation. And main point three, you're going to state a solution or the solution. There could be many, but remember, we're trying to keep these focused. We don't have all the time in the world. So a solution could be invest in more public transportation. For this speech, honestly, probably the organizational pattern for the person of interest is probably going to be topical, categorical, or biographical. Ultimately, what you talk about is up to you. I care more about how you say than what you say, although we should always keep in mind our audience and what they're going to find exciting. You may not just want to go into the baseball stats of your favorite player. That may not be very exciting. So you do have to think about your audience. But for this speech, I really want you to get into the format. And speaking of the format, if you've ever seen a 5-paragraph essay, in a lot of ways, writing a speech is the same. So we're going to kind of break this down, starting with the introduction. So the introduction is really going to have these 4 points in it. You're going to have an impactful opening, a thesis, an audience connection, and a preview. But when we're starting to write, we really want to start with our thesis and our preview. My guess is that you already have part of a thesis. It's going to be who you're talking about. Don't make your audience guess. Every once in a while, I get a student who's trying to be clever and says, "Oh, which artist is the best in the world, has sold millions of copies of their albums, and is considered the nicest person on the earth." Well, a lot of people may come up for your audience with that. Just tell us who you're talking about, okay? And your preview is just going to be your main points. So your thesis, it's going to clarify your perspective about your topic. Today, I'm going to be talking about Robert Downey Jr.'s movies, or 3 of Robert Downey Jr.'s movies. It's a statement put forward as a premise to be maintained or proved. In the example of the problem cause solution, maybe my thesis is the Bay Area needs to commit to better public transportation for all in order to reduce traffic on our freeways. Well, that is a premise that I need to prove to you all. Your preview just is going to foreshadow your main points. It just creates a roadmap. So it can make it easier for your audience to know what's going to come up next. There's something called serial position effect, where humans remember information in a linear fashion. An individual's ability to remember information in a list depends on the location of the item on the list. Specifically, he found that there's items found at the top of the list and items found at the bottom of the list have the highest recall rates. So, in order to have our audience understand or remember our speech more, we want to say them at the beginning and guess what? At the end as well. Also, to be more persuasive, we want to repeat ourselves. And this is where essay writing and speech writing really differs. Repetition is a wonderful thing in speech writing. To be more persuasive, repeat yourself. And I'll say this several times. Repetition equals retention equals persuasion. So you've got your thesis and your preview. So now you have your main points, right? Your main point A, B, and or C. I would say for the person of interest, 2 main points is fine. All the way up to 4 main points is fine. But I want more than 1 main point, and I don't want more than 4 main points. Now, your main points, again, I don't care what you say. I only care how you say it. There needs to be one orally cited source. An orally cited source is you telling your audience where you found the information and why it's credible. We're going to break this down more in the APA lectures. You have to have at least one of them in one of the main points, and you need to highlight it for me in the outline. While I don't grade your orally cited source in your outline, I do in your speech. So you've written your main point. Maybe you like what I did for my example is my first main point. I wrote about the movie Chaplin. For my second main point, I wrote about natural born killers. And my third main point, I wrote about Iron Man. But what I say As your teacher, I'm not really going to care. As your audience, of course, I will. You want to make sure that it's accessible to them. But what you say specifically is not going to be my focus, okay? But in between your main points, I am going to want to hear about transitions. Now, transitions are part of that roadmap for the audience. The best transitions are going to review the last main point and preview the next main point. For example, now that I've talked about Robert Downey Jr.'s award-winning performance in Chaplin, let's chat about one of his most controversial roles in Natural Born Killers. I told you we talked about Chaplin, and now we're moving on to Natural Born Killers. A good transition would be as simple as, let's chat about one of his most controversial roles in Natural Born Killers. You're moving on. And an okay transition would be something like, let's move on to the next main point. But all of these are transitions. Again, your English teacher is probably telling you, oh my gosh, you have to be more flowery, you have to flow more. In speeches, you want to be clear is superior to clever. So you've gotten through your 2 or 3 main points, and now we're coming into your conclusion. So you're going to want to have a signal to review and your review itself. So your signal to conclude is just a word or phrase that tells your audience, hey, coming to the end. In conclusion, I talked about 3 movies of Robert Downey Jr.'s. In conclusion, we talked about Charles Manson's early life, whatever it happens to be. It could be finally, now that we're coming to the end, ultimately, to wrap up, whatever it happens to be. Your review, guess what? It's your preview, just past tense. Today I talked about, that's it. Remember, to be more persuasive, we want to repeat ourselves. To remember, to make sure our information is remembered, we want to repeat ourselves. So today I talked about Chaplin, Natural Born Killers, and Iron Man, and really the introduction of the Marvel Universe. Now, while I've gone over a lot of stuff already, there are some things that I've missed on here. One of them is not on my outline, but I like to talk about. It's your credibility statement. If you have significant background information on the topic that you're discussing, you might put a credibility statement in there. When I'm giving speeches for the Navy, I have a credibility statement. I'm a senior chief in the Navy. I've been serving since 1998, and I have been teaching whatever it is I'm about to teach you today for the last how long? This is why you can believe me. I don't ask for this in my class because I feel like it's a little hard to say, you should believe me on Robert Downey Jr. because I spent 2 hours researching him on the internet. Isn't a really strong credibility statement, but it can be powerful if you have that credibility behind you. The other parts are going to be the impactful opening, your audience connection, and your impactful conclusion. Now, your audience connection, while it's after the thesis in the outline example, in the outline draft, you're welcome to move it before your thesis. Your audience connection, you need to tell your audience why they should listen to you. What's in it for them? The best way to do this may be to approach your topic from your audience's perspectives. For example, you may want to say, raise your, uh, I'm certain that every single student in this classroom has seen a Marvel movie. Well, what if I told you it was this actor who really cemented the legacy of Marvel cinema and the Marvel world? Today, we're going to be talking about Robert Downey Jr. and 3 of his movies. You're ultimately going to give and provide reasons to listen. This is, without a doubt, the hardest part of any speech, in my opinion, to write. Everything else, it's not difficult at all. Then we've got our impactful intros and conclusions. A great opening could be a reference to a current event. Since I keep on talking about Robert Downey Jr., well, we know the new Avengers is coming out with Robert Downey Jr. as Dr. Doom. That might be an interesting way to get them on the topic. It could be an anecdote. Now, I like to think of anecdotes and personal references as a little different. Anecdotes could be something that we don't specifically know is true, like Jack and Jill went up the hill. That might be an anecdote. Or a great anecdote might be something like a fable, like the tortoise and the hare. What's the moral of that? Slow and steady wins the race. Opening with a quotation is a great way to open with the person of interest. It could be from the person of interest, it could be about the person of interest, or it could just be something that reminds you of the person of interest. Opening with a question, there it goes. Opening with a question is without a doubt the easiest way to open a speech. But I always like to tell the audience, make sure, or tell the students to make sure that you tell your audience what you want them to do. So instead of saying something like, how many of you have a cell phone? Which could elicit a huge answer and everybody trying to tell you their makes and models, which can be a little bit distracting. Tell them what you want them to do. For example, raise your hand if you have a cell phone. If you've ever accidentally answered a rhetorical question, it doesn't really feel good. So as a speaker, let's make sure that we don't set our audience up to not feel good. And then we've got a startling statement or statistic. I love these. These can be the most wonderful ways to open a speech. Really grab them by attention. It could be something like, I had one student who was giving a speech on a war correspondent, and he actually opened his speech with a loud boom and said, this is what the so-and-so journalist woke up to every day in Afghanistan. Or it could be some crazy statistic that you know. Like, for example, that contrary to popular belief, men can actually lactate. There's a reason men have nipples. Stuff like that makes people kind of stand up and say, wait, what? Those kind of openings can be a great way to grab their attention. Personal experience or reference, as opposed to anecdote, I find these need to be more true. Your credibility is on the line if you're telling us a personal story. And if it's a reference, it should be something from a credible source. For example, maybe you read a story in the Washington Post. That would be a wonderful way to open up a speech. Closings, you could conclude with a question, but unlike that opening with a question where I want you to be very specific on what you need your audience to do, raise your hand and answer this question. Or can somebody tell me? Conclude with a question can be much more open-ended because even if somebody answers the question or it causes a debate or conversation in the class, that's fine because your speech is over. You can conclude with a challenge. For example, if you were talking about a musical artist, you could say, I challenge you right now to take out your cell phones, go to your Spotify, go to your Pandora, go to your Apple Music, plug in this artist's name so that when you're driving home today, when you leave this classroom and pop in your earbuds, this is what you get to listen to. And tell me if you don't think they're as amazing as I do. You could conclude with a quotation. Again, it could be a quote from the person of interest, about the person of interest, or just something that reminds you of maybe the challenges they went through. Conclude with inspiration. Honestly, I kind of suck at coming up with these on the top of my head. Most of these are just me riffing. So I always like just to go to Pinterest. I always find a good, in this case, it's both a quote and an inspirational ending. And then finally, you can conclude with a reference to the introduction, which I think is a wonderful way, sometimes known as a callback, especially in stand-up comedians. A lot of times they'll end their show with a reference to the introduction. Now, here's a great example of a student from a few years ago doing exactly that. Now, just to start you off, what I've done with this video is I've recorded the introduction and the conclusion so you can actually hear his audience connection, his thesis, his preview, and then it cuts back to his signal to conclude, his review, his thesis, and then his conclusion, conclude with power. The only thing that I wasn't able to capture in this is his introduction, opening introduction, which was raise your hand if you like rap music. So let's see what he does to kind of conclude with an opening to the ending.
Or do not. The person I'm about to talk about, he's not really a rapper. He's not really influential to rap, but I think he could probably be one of the best rappers alive. It's Dr. Seuss. All right. So Today I'll be quickly informing you about some of Dr. Seuss's books, some of his movies, and kind of the legacy that he's left behind from his works. So I've highlighted his books, his movies, and his legacy a bit, and now I'm gonna wrap Fox in a Sock, or a little bit of it for you guys. So let's go. Please, sir, I don't like this trick, sir. My tongue isn't quick or slick, sir. I get all these ticks and clocks, sir, mixed up with the chicks and talk, sir. I can't do this, Mr. Fox, sir. I'm sorry, Mr. Knox, sir. Here's an easy game to play. Here's an easy thing to say. New socks, two socks, two socks, two socks, two sews, two socks, two sews, two socks. Thank you.
So you notice that he started with raise your hand if you like rap, and then he ended by rapping Dr. Seuss. A couple things I always like to point out about this is that he made himself vulnerable when he was rapping this ending, and you could see how nervous he was. But making ourselves nervous and that self-disclosure and making ourselves vulnerable really can help bring the audience closer to the speaker. It's a very powerful technique. The final part of any outline is going to be your APA, your references. For in-text citations, every fact needs to have an in-text citation. For orally cited sources, you're going to need 1 for the person of interest, 5 for the informative, and 6 for the persuasive. And references for every source used must be referenced. We're going to have a whole other lecture on that, so we're not going to get too bogged down on it now. So what did we talk about? Over this whole area, we talked about the 3 types of outlines, why we outline, writing your outline, and outline guidelines for success. If you have any questions, reach out. I am here to help you.